Welcome to the New Indian Express Worldview. This is a grim moment when we are facing another war. Unprovoked, Israel started bombing Iran a few days ago, and Iran retaliated. What seemed to have a few off-ramps early in the skirmish doesn't seem to have any now. Even Donald Trump has rushed back from the G7 meeting in Canada to be in Washington for what he says is not a ceasefire. What does it mean for India and the world? To discuss it with us today is our Diplomatic Editor Jayanth Jacob. I'm Amitava Sanyal, Opinion Editor. Let's begin at the beginning, Jayanth. No country other than Israel wanted this war. What are Israel's reasons, given that it's already fighting in Gaza, that has gone unabated, it's still bombing Gaza, and it still has other potential problems, even while it's talking to Syria. There are problems there. There is the disarming of Hezbollah on its northern borders that's going on, and there is a threat there, ever-present threat there. So what is the reason for Israel to start it now?
So this shadow war between Israel and Iran have been going on for a long time. For Israel, Iran is the most important existential threat, quote unquote, because no other country in the region has the power to strike Israel at will or harm Israel to some extent, which can actually create a problem for Israelis. That has been the case for a long time. Also, Israel believes that all these proxies that are in the region that harm Israel through different means, through the proxy war, etc., all these are funded and helped by the Iranians. So for Israel striking at Iran militarily, especially if you look at the target selection, it's like the nuclear target, the defense target, and also there's some undertone of a regime change. So from Israel's point of view, this is like trying to eliminate and settle with their most important existential threat. But I don't think that is that easy to do it. It is easy said than done. Iran is not any country in the neighborhood. Iran is tougher than all the countries put together, perhaps. So anyway, it was a very audacious attack. It was a very daring attack, and Israel has definitely crossed a red line.
It has crossed several red lines, we can say that. But coming as it does, when the so-called Iranian proxies, the Houthis in Yemen, the Syrian regime, and the Hezbollah in Lebanon, they are weakened. The Syrian regime is gone. Assad's regime is gone. The Hezbollahs are being disarmed. The Houthis have signed a pact with US. They seem to indicate that they can be more selective in picking their targets, though they are still belligerent towards Israel. Given that it's a weaker point, possibly militarily it made sense for Israel to strike now, but there was no real casus belli, the reason for a war. It didn't even try to attempt to present a cogent case to the world that this is why we are doing it now. The fact that the claim that the Iranians are few weeks away from enrichment to the level that they can build a nuclear warhead with, that threat has been hanging, and Israelis have been making that allegation for a long time. If it was true earlier, Iran should already have the bomb. If it's true now, there really isn't much proof. Though there was the International Atomic Energy Agency report, right after which Iran was targeted. So is that linked? Is the Atomic Energy report taken as a cue?
Yeah, there are a couple of things. I think this is also a battle or a war for Netanyahu's legacy. Like he wants to, with one stroke, he wants to secure Israel forever kind of a thing that he's doing, but he's not winning any of it. If you look at what is happening in Gaza, he couldn't even defeat Hamas, which is a known state actor. Then he has gone after Iran. So nuclear, if you look at, there are two ways to look at it. One way you can say that it's always Israel which derailed the nuclear deal, more than the Americans. That's a fact.
It targeted the negotiators.
So this time, since Iran is acting a bit pricey as far as the Western or the Americans or the Israelis are concerned, this could be one way to weaken them and bring them to negotiation. That is a very far-fetched kind of an idea, because that is not very easy for Israelis to achieve at this point in time. Second, all the talk about Iran was almost there to create a bomb, but doesn't add up, because if you look at all this American intelligence that has come out, so it doesn't suggest anything of that sort. Even if you look at the last IAEA report, They are nearing a weapon grade uranium, but they haven't actually reached there. So what IAEA is saying that they have enough material which can be in weapon grade for 9 to 10 weapons. Then what about the weapon delivery mechanism? So Iran is some months away from creating a weapon grade uranium. That is a fact. But if you attack a country this way, war has always been a rallying point for all the governments, all the regimes, the national. And Iran is also a very old country. It's like an ancient civilization.
Yeah.
So it's not very easy to browbeat Iran. So also, you look at the size of these countries. So Israel is a very small country. Of course, it's a very powerful country in the sense because they have a lot of arms, ammunition, American blank check and all that. They have no money problem, resource problem. It's basically a diaspora country. Their diaspora, wherever they are, the Jewish diaspora is very powerful. So Israel doesn't have this kind of problem. But if you compare these two countries, Iran is much bigger, at least 10 times bigger. Iran has much more natural resources than Israel. Israel doesn't have any. But to browbeat and defeat a country like Iran militarily, I think it's a bit of too much of an ambition here. But Israel believes that once the war goes out of control, then they will get their allies to get into it. Because not supporting Israel is a very difficult proposition for Trump. Supporting Israel is also a difficult proposition for Trump because his MAGA campaign, America first, not getting entangled in foreign wars, all that will go out of the window. If you look at the last speech which Trump made in Saudi Arabia, in this region, his first visit was to this region. There he said actually like nation builders, he was referring to a lot of former American presidents, nation builders destroyed more countries than they built. So this nuclear threat and things look like President Bush talking about weapons of mass destruction with Saddam Hussein. But Iran is not even Iraq or Egypt or Lebanon, any other country you can talk about in the region. It's a very tough country, it's a very difficult country. So it's not an easy way out for Israelis, I believe.
America has always made the case that it's a reluctant last-minute entrant to big wars. It has been doing so for more than 100 years, though each case is different. Every time it has made the case that no, we don't want the war, but then being dragged in by some of our allies, and in this case it's Israel. They're squarely taken them in. But let's look at it from the Iran or the regional point of view. What do you make of Iran's response? It was clear that they had to respond. They had themselves, like we have talked about India's strategic response to Pakistan, that once you cross a line, as in do respond in a certain way militarily, you have sort of pressure. The next time it happens to do at least the same. Same thing was true for Iran. But how has it gone through? How do you grade Iran's response in this case, starting from the initial barrage, then them asking some regional countries like Saudi Arabia, Qatar and others to intervene on their behalf with Trump to pressure Israel to call it off, offering a direct off-ramp rather. So how do you grade their response?
So I think Iran's response was proportionate so far, because if you look at the first strike from Israeli side, it killed their military leadership. Some of their top commanders were killed. Even today they killed their chief of staff of the wartime. So the strike was very disproportionate from Israelis' point of view. So Iran had to respond. As a sovereign country, they didn't have any other option in a warlike situation when a unilateral war, use of force is imposed upon your territory, questioning your sovereignty, your regime, leadership, your military commanders, and the targets are very carefully chosen. Their nuclear facilities, their defense establishments, and related sites. So Iran didn't have an option but to strike back. But in that way, Iran used force, which I think was relatively proportionate. But in a war, there is nothing like a proportionate force or use of proportionate means all the time. Sometimes things go here and there. That also happened in this war. But Iran did that kind of a response, which was expected of Iran or any other country which was attacked at the first place. But after that, anyway, it's also a fact that Israel is such a big power, is such a big military power with a lot of powerful friends. So Iran doesn't want to perhaps to prolong this for long. If you look at the last statement by the Iranian president, that was very measured. They said they didn't want to expand the war with Israel. So obviously there is a sign there. They are trying to reach out through Qatar, Omanis, the countries who are very close to the Americans or the West. They are trying to strike out a deal perhaps there. If you look at the Trump statement after leaving G7, he also said he would be perhaps sending his Middle East envoy or vice president, hoping for a nuclear deal to happen next week to Iran to meet with Iranian foreign minister. So I think that is not a bad strategy for Iran to take a step back. But if the war continues, the entire region will get into a disarray or a larger instability will come into a region. It's a very critical region for a lot of countries, for the energy supplies. There are a lot of trade, commerce, and also it's Iran, Israel. Anyway, there has always been a shadow war. If you see this kind of a direct war, also remember this is the first time after 1960s Iran is getting into a full-fledged war. Waging a war against Hezbollah or Hamas is not actually a war. It's like a big state out against a non-state actor, a group of terrorist organization and things like that. Here you are targeting a big country and which has every right to retaliate under all the international conventions because their sovereignty is breached. But in that way, I think Iran in the immediate run will look out for an exit route that will be good for both the countries and for the region as well.
So one thing is for sure that it is Israel every step from the beginning which is ratcheting up the level of confrontation. So as you rightly pointed out, it targeted very precisely particular houses even in a building block, particular facilities. It left out a few other facilities for a while, the oil refineries or ports for a while, though Iran retaliated after they did with the Haifa thing. We'll come back to Haifa later. But now that Israel is asking Tehranis, people in the capital, Iranian capital, to leave, especially this particular district in the north, which is the posh district with rich people, senior government officials and retired government officials, for them to leave so that it can be bombed, is definitely a step up, isn't it? It's a direct threat to the regime.
If you look at the statement by Netanyahu, so it's like this: we have targeted military establishment, nuclear facilities. Also, we want to save you from your regime. That is the tone. So he's naturally hoping that there is a lot of discontentment against the Ayatollah Khomeini regime in Iran, which is a fact because of various reasons. But he thinks a military strike like this will be galvanizing all this disgruntled element within Iran to rise up against the regime. But that hardly happens because...
Isn't it the opposite that is likely to happen?
Most likely that it's opposite.
Given the history.
Yeah, that is how it is. Because wherever they have tried to create a regime change in this region, there has always been a power vacuum. You look at what happened in Iraq, what happened in Syria, any other country in Libya. So this is not an easy place for any other country looking from outside. Regime change is not something which happens this way, like somebody coming and bombing your country and asking the people to throw out a regime. So that doesn't happen that way. But Israel thinks, because you have seen all these statements in the American television channel by the son of the former Shah of Iran and things like that. So they're trying their best to ensure that this discontentment that existed in Iran for some point of time now, so that comes to a boiling point and naturally result in the regime getting changed, but that doesn't happen that way. And also this striking at the nuclear facility, if you have to completely decapacitate the nuclear facility of Iran, Israelis need the help of the Americans.
Yeah, they need to be on ground, isn't it?
Yeah, on the ground.
Because it is deep underground with a special kind of bunkers. Though the IAEA chief has said that some of the centrifuges may have been affected.
And also the point is that nuclear know-how, a country which is doing it for some time, it gets institutionalized. Even if you kill 9 scientists like they did this time, or even if you kill 90 scientists, it doesn't go away. Like institutionally, it will be there because that is how nuclear know-how is handled.
Right.
Like if you're killing a generation of people, then also it won't get wiped off. So the apparent reason for Israel to strike Iran at this point in time, and all these objectives may not be even met, but only outcome I could see now is that will it lead to a nuclear deal? Iran is getting weak, or Iran doesn't want to escalate any further because they are getting hit back. So the Americans, the Trump administration is making its move right, and are they getting into a nuclear deal with Iran? But the earlier rhetoric may not even work this time. So Iran has to get some leeway, like they will be enriching uranium to a particular point of view, not obviously to the weapon grade, but otherwise this will not happen because a wounded country that has become Iran, now Iran is now a wounded country, it's an attack country. So completely giving up nuclear program is not an option for Iran. It's government, it's Russia.
You mentioned Libya. Now, a lot of people recent days have been talking again of Libya, of the difference between North Korea and Libya. How Muammar Gaddafi gave up the nuclear bomb, and within 10 years was dead in a ditch with support from Western powers, whereas North Korea, nobody has yet dared strike.
Absolutely.
So people have been, including in the American ecosystem of commentariat, they have been talking about this in recent times. This shows Iran what the choices actually are if it really wants long-term security. On the other hand, given to the extent, the deep extent to which American foreign policy is sort of held hostage to Israeli will, or the greater Zionist lobby's will, is it even possible, though, as you rightly said, Trump earlier also said, soon after the strike started, and again said while leaving G7, that okay, this moment of pressure on Iran could be actually a deal-making moment. When they're weak, they can come to the table. Do you think it's even possible, given that everything is dictated by Israel, and from the force mobilization of US and other Western powers, it seems they're very much behind Israel, even if not taking directly part of the offensive bit of the confrontation?
I think it's not impossible to have a nuclear deal, but to what extent? That is the question. Trump is in a very unique situation. Earlier, before Trump, you look at all the American presidents who attacked other countries, especially in this region, national security was never tied to the domestic politics so deeply the way it is under Trump administration, because of America first, and his talk about withdrawing all American involvement from abroad, tariff war, and everything around that. So this time you see an isolationist America politically. So that is one aspect of it. If he again gets out there, ties American foreign policy, American military into a war, it will be a very difficult situation for Trump to handle back home, especially among his core constituency. That is something which is of his own making. So it will be very difficult for him to get out of that. That is number one. Second, like you mentioned about the Zionist and the Jewish influence in American political system and systems everywhere else in the world, both Democrats and Republicans. So they are heavily influenced by the Jewish lobby or the Jewish
especially
system.
in recent years, the Zionist lobby.
Yeah, Zionist lobby. So that is a fact. So getting out of that, like completely backing off from supporting Israel, cannot be a choice for President Trump. No other any other American president would have done the same thing, because they would have done it easily, because they didn't tie the American foreign policy so deeply with the domestic policy the way Trump has done. So for Trump, it's a bit of a difficult negotiation happening there, a bit of a tightrope walk. But as long as he can get his hands on a nuclear deal, even to some extent, it will justify all this movement. But look at though he has come to office second time as a peacemaking kind of a president, but it hasn't worked on ground yet. What is happening with Russia and Ukraine? So war is still raging. Attack has escalated actually. So there is nothing on the ground to say that Trump can actually succeed. Maybe this for the first time that can happen. So that is also a point. But the way escalation is happening, so Trump has to do a lot of diplomatic calisthenics, so to speak, to get both the parties back onto the discussion table.
It's remarkable that Western powers, which seem to disagree with US on Gaza, on Israel's terrible actions in Gaza, which by the way continues, is suddenly coalesced around the action against Iran. There are so deep-seated links to the region, or their interests, from the earlier so-called Great Game, when the Pahlavi family was handpicked by Britain and US and put in at a moment the Ottoman Empire had collapsed and the Saudi Kingdom had coalesced, to have the Anglo-Persian Oil Company put in place, and then again the Shah. Coming to Indian interests, there are deep old, here is a strategic partner, Iran is a strategic partner, Israel is also a security partner for India. Now, given the war, the first implication everybody talks about is oil, the price of oil. What is the outlook for that? What do you think is happening? Of course, the prices have gone up.
So if the war continues this way, naturally the prices will go, markets will crash. And also the regional instability is a big factor for India. If you look at India's relationship with both the countries, both are important relationships. Israel has been a very key defense partner of late, a very important security partner. So Israel is an important country for India's scheme of things. If you look at Iran is a very important strategic partner for India in the region. For decades that is the case. India's connectivity plan, all this connectivity to Central Asia, Chabahar port, and all related things, Iran is a very important partner for India. And even for other strategic purposes also, Iran has been a very key partner for India. So India is doing a balancing act here. If you see, Indian foreign minister spoke to both their foreign ministers. India technically didn't join an SEO statement which was condemning Israel.
Wasn't that a surprise?
It was actually a surprising thing, because if you look at the history of this kind of statements, India only abstained from SEO statements which has a mention about BRI, because for India it's an issue of sovereignty, because part of this project
China's Belt and Road Initiative.
Yeah, that goes through India's Pakistan occupied Kashmir, so that is an issue of sovereignty for India. But this is a bit surprising in the sense this is the first time it has happened, because all other countries, and also Iran is an SEO member. So all 10 countries grouping suddenly why you have to do this. But India's justification is that we spoke to both the countries and our national position is very clear, which essentially means both the countries come to the discussion table and bring down the escalation, and they have to find a solution through discussions. But it is very surprising. I completely agree with you on that.
Then there is the issue of Indian students, some 2,000 of them.
So almost 1,600 of them, around 2,000. And also, altogether, if you look at, there are 10,000 Indian nationals in Israel.
Right.
Sorry, in Iran.
In Iran.
So I think evacuating them will not be a very big task, because land, except with Pakistan, anyway, you are not going to use the land boundary with Pakistan. So other countries are open, like Armenia is helping India to get people out. So you can also have the easy option of using the UAE sea route. Only airspace is controlled by the Israelis, and it's a dangerous space. Otherwise, land route so far, even in the fifth day of the war, that is today, land route remains by and large okay, and Armenia is helping India, and you can move people, because it's not widely spread all over. Most of the students are in Tehran and around. So evacuation will not be a very difficult task unless Israel suddenly escalates the war and bombs throughout Iran. Something of that happens, then it will be a very difficult proposition to evacuate. Otherwise, things look pretty.
They are being relocated to other parts of Iran for now.
And some of them also.
Do we know where?
There is a city called Qom, which is like 148 kilometers from Tehran.
Right.
But many of them have crossed.
Which is where Khomeini's hot.
From there, many of them have already crossed into. Like in the morning itself, around 120 crossed into Armenia.
Right.
So already Indian foreign minister spoke to his Armenian counterpart, or they are ready to help India and all that. I don't think it's a big issue this time, evacuation, because the geography is such, because there are other countries which you can use, friendly countries around.
The other Indian interest is the port in Haifa, where almost a third of trade happens, overseas sea route trade happens for Israel, and 70% of which is controlled by Adani Group. And that is also a major part, envisioned as a future major player in the India-Middle East economic corridor. It would be a part of that. A missile landed close to it. There were minor damages, though then the port authorities said that they are still functioning as they were. It was actually something close that was hit, not directly at the thing. Now, given the fog of war, is there a way that India can be assured more than it is, given that it is talking to both sides, that
I don't think unless Israel attacks all their ports or some of their key ports, I don't think Bandar Abbas or Chabahar or things like that, I don't think they will get into that level. Because of course, in a war kind of a situation, like some missile hitting, some drones going, so that all is taken care of. But deliberately attacking a port facility of this scale, but I think that doesn't happen unless Israel attacks some of their key ports. Then in a retaliation, they may have to do that.
Now, the other players in the region. Iraq has indicated that it was unhappy that its airspace was used by Israeli Air Force to launch attacks into Iran. It may be a formal position and it may not be able to do much beyond that, given that the still continuing heavy presence of US, despite whatever regime is in power there. Then there is Saudi Arabia, which has become closer to Iran in recent years, thanks to China in part. And at the beginning, it used the memorable phrase of brotherly Islamic Republic of Iran. We are with them, and we strongly condemn Israel, they initially said. China also, Wang Yi called both sides, Iran and Israel, and strongly condemned Israel's actions. Putin, in the readout after talking to the latest talk with Trump, actually also the Kremlin readout said that he strongly condemned to Trump Israel's unilateral action. So given that these people who have extremely high stakes in the region and measure of influence, they are not interested in this war continuing. Can they be part of the solution? What are the off-ramps now?
So they can be part of the solution, not to the extent where Americans can be. Because if you look at any war-like situation, for example, something happens in this region, India doesn't need America's military support, so to speak, if you are going for a confrontation or a hostility with a neighbor. So you have other suppliers. Israel's case, Israel is totally dependent on the Americans. So
Almost Germany too.
Yeah, to some extent, but Americans are the big elephant in the room. So the point here is that more than all these countries put together, so I think Americans have the leverage. So what we are seeing now is that Netanyahu is not listening to Trump on the face of it, but if Trump wants Netanyahu to listen to him, he has the wherewithal. So I think he can make it happen. But Trump is also, I think, looking for an opportunity where Iran may get a bit weak, so talking to them will be easier, or a nuclear deal can happen. But more than any other countries in the region, so I think the Americans have the leverage. The West has the leverage over Israel rather than any other country. Because Saudi Arabia is fine, it has a good relation with America, it has a good relation with Israel, but not to the extent that Americans has influence over Israel, because I think Americans have the biggest leverage in this situation.
But China is the one.
China is like Turkey in this
by
case.
far the biggest buyer of Iranian oil and has been.
Yeah, that's fine, but the point is that Chinese doesn't have that kind of a leverage with Israel. So, and also China is trying to be some kind of a Turkey in this situation. Like Turkey, China, they all try to make their own presence felt, but they haven't reached there yet, I believe, because still Americans hold most of the leverages with the Israelis.
Before Netanyahu blew the lid of this game, Putin was supposed to visit Iran, and there is a different kind of a indication of a closer relationship after Pezeshkian met him and Putin promised to visit them. Nobody knows whether that visit will go ahead anytime soon, given what is happening, but that is also another important part, isn't it?
Absolutely, because if you look at, this is completely West versus the rest. So there is no denying the fact that, because all other countries, Iran is a very close partner of all these countries, including India, including Russia. If you look at all the countries in the region, in and around that region, so most countries have a very good relation with Iran. So Iran has been a friendly country for most countries. So there is no problem there. I still think unless there is a huge war going on for a long time, President Putin might travel to Tehran sooner than later. But all said and done, I think to bring Israel and Iran back to the normal, the West, especially the Americans, have to play an important role. So nobody else has the kind of clout which the Americans have.
So we started on a grim point, we conclude on a grim point. Today could be the day Tehran faces more heat in this increasingly worrying war, which has come so close to India. We will keep a keen eye on the goings on and update you as soon as we can. Thank you for watching.